Hello, New Zealand. Happy New Year. Welcome to Straight Talk. We are back for a fourth year. Well, we've had 2 full years and a little bit of a year. Now we start our fourth year. This is episode number 68. Tonight on our first episode for the year, we discuss lunches in schools, drag queen protests, Trump 2.0. Will it be Luxon and Hipkins at the next election? And what should be the name of our country? Well, if we get through all those topics, we'll go at breakneck speed. But firstly, let's find out the first bunch of panellists who drew the short straw for the first night of the year when we're all really rusty and forgetting what to do. We've got a great lineup. Firstly, Rodney Hyde in the, super bright area of Queenstown, because it never gets dark in Queenstown in summer, does it, Rodney?
Doesn't get dark in summer. It gets very dark in winter. It's lovely to be here. I love the panelists. I love Bob McCoskrie, and I love the listeners and watchers and the viewers of this show. So thank you for having me back.
You know what? For that, I might send you a cup, a Straight Talk cup.
Would
Okay,
use
it's in the
cup.
mail.
I would use that cup every day.
Speaking of other bright areas, Bruce Logan is in Christchurch. How are you, Bruce?
I'm very well, and I'm pleased to be with Rodney too.
Good.
Great.
And just slightly, is it east, west? No, it's north. No, it's south. Rangiora. Which side of Christchurch is it?
Bob.
North,
Bob.
Okay, heading towards
Come on.
us. Brendan, always good to have you. Happy New Year.
Yeah, great to be back, Bob, and thank you. And I couldn't agree more with the sentiments of Rodney. It is good to be back.
Okay, and gosh, you guys are fools. I'm going to ask you this in a couple of months, and you'll all say, "Oh, am I rostered again?" And Sue Reed in Masterton, which is the troubled hotspot, literally. The media are all over the story. They just can't stop reporting it because 7 churches got attacked. Sue, you're actually in Masterton. I hear that things are still pretty nervy down there, which is why the media won't go anywhere near it.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what they're playing at. 6 churches and a funeral chapel. And people were very frightened and still are, because the so-called offender still hasn't been apprehended. Lots of sirens yesterday, and church-going people, they did gather. One little church had to hold their service out in the car park, and some Sikhs came around and didn't participate in the service, but stood behind them as a mark of respect and comfort for them. And people had told, concerned relatives were saying, please don't go to church until this person's been caught, but they still gathered. But I would say that if this had have been a marae, a mosque or a temple, we would have had every MP here and we would have had every news channel here. This is very serious. This person allegedly involved in it put out a very concerning and very scary video to our community pages because he wanted it seen. And so people are on edge, and people are very upset because the Christian churches here and those particular ones that were affected do a lot for our community here. We have one of them is involved in our chaplaincy. They're associated and attached to schools. One has to meet in the school hall next week. So the media is really, really remiss, and I can't think of anything else that could be more important to be reporting on just right now. This is unfolding. This is happening.
There's an important breaking story. Someone did a skid on the Rainbow Crossing in Tauranga, so all the media have had to go to that one. That's the priority at the moment. Anyway, I say that facetiously. Anyway, we are watching that story with interest because it is concerning, and hopefully they apprehend the arsonist. All right, image of it's the month and it's sort of our theme. It's this image of Donald Trump signing an executive order saying that there are only 2 sexes and that men shouldn't play in women's sports. And he's surrounded by women then, which for many people who have painted him as very anti-woman, it's kind of it's a paradox of just that image there. Quite the contrast. In fact, on Fox News, they actually gathered together some Republicans, Independents, and Democrats in a room. And as he made the announcement, they tracked their approval rating. Now, the red line is Republicans. They'd obviously support biology. But the yellow line is Independents. and then the blue line is Democrats. So the Democrats still aren't happy with the fact that males can't play in female sports. You can actually see it going down there. But independents, which are the swing voters, those are the important ones. Those were the ones that are happy with the statement, slightly less than Republicans, but still very happy. So, yeah, it's very fascinating to watch. Now, the video of the week, while I was at the ARC conference in London, J.D. Vance, the vice president, was in Munich at a security conference, and he was making some very interesting comments around free speech and also about what had been happening to pro-lifers. Have a listen.
I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person, but no. This last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
Yeah, well, that was a pretty radical speech, wasn't it? Actually saying that they could, defend your right to say whatever you wanted to say. But then the German defense minister, actually, he might not be the defense minister anymore after the election today, eh? But anyway, he gets up and he basically says, well, free speech, I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure you can say that, which was kind of ironic.
This democracy was put in question by the vice president in front of all of Europe. He spoke about the annulment of democracy. And if I understood him correctly, he compared conditions in parts of Europe with those in authoritarian regimes. This is not acceptable.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Gordon, I can't actually hear anything coming through, so maybe you can just fix that up. But anyway, it was interesting. Free speech is okay, except when you go to the EU and then you can't say it. Anyway, team, let's get straight into our first topic. And, we did touch on Trump. It's Trump 2.0. He started in a dizzying start. I mean, there's only two sexes, male and female, ended gender transitions for people under 19. He's not using federal funds to promote gender ideology. Americans aren't forced to fund abortions overseas. He's ending radical indoctrination in schools, exiting the World Health Organization into government DEI programs, pardoned 23 peaceful pro-lifers, withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement, and restored freedom of speech, and ended federal censorship. And in the military, he's removed DEI, and he's reinstated soldiers who were expelled for refusing COVID-19 vaccines. Whew, and he did that all in a month. So it's been a whirlwind and people are a little bit worried. So I'm interested to see what you've thought of Trump 2.0, because the point I want to ask all of you is, if it was Biden operating at this pace and so radical, would we be so excited? So Bruce, I'm going to start with you in the Deep South. What do you think of Trump 2.0? And are we just enjoying it because it's kind of policies that we like?
Well, there's all of those things there. I think there are a couple of things, though, that occurred to me that are going on that one couldn't have talked about even a year ago.
Mm.
And one of them is that the political right is no longer in reaction mode. As far as I can remember, those people who are on even the mild right were at reaction. They were on the back foot.
Yeah.
That's changed. And I think we can thank Trump for that to a large extent. And there's something else going on too, which is recent. It's now relatively easy to claim that Christianity is the foundation of Western civilization. Even Richard Dawkins is happy to be called a cultural Christian, even although he may not accept the faith of the Christianity, he sees the value. Now that's a huge shift in the tone of what's been going on. And while Trump may not be the main reason for that, or perhaps he is, he's certainly a catalyst for bringing that about. And his cry that there are only two genders, of course, opens up a whole range of expectations that are a result of that. We used to call them sexes, by the way. It's interesting we've changed the name to gender, but that's another story.
Yeah.
Whatever the case, Trump's managed to break, I think he's managed to break the back of the diversity cult. Although in New Zealand here, I think it's still going pretty strong. And as you pointed out, Vance's speech was exceptional and worrying, though, because Europe is not as committed to free speech. It certainly doesn't appear to be. It's committed to free speech as I would like it to be. So I'm excited and concerned about Trump. I mean, he says some silly things. His nonsense about wanting to rename this and that seems to be irrelevant. But his claim to Panama, for example, is very meaningful and has a lot of implication. We have to wait and see how the Ukraine situation spins out. But he is right about America first and the need to get Europe to carry itself. The time has come for that to do it, and I hope that happens because it needs to start protecting itself. And the outcome of the German election today was, I think, probably wouldn't have happened with such clarity had Trump not spoken up, because he has affected the whole tone around the world. So for that, we have to thank him.
Yeah, in fact, Simon O'Connor and I were talking about that on Political Playback, that there's been 70 elections last year around the world, and in general, the overall move has been a shift to the right by the world. Rodney, I know that you've been enjoying the last month. You've been texting me every so often to say you're just having the best day ever. So what's been your highlights? And do you have any concerns around the speed, and do we just like it because he's doing things we like?
I go to bed every night thinking I can't love Donald Trump any more than I do. And I wake up in the morning and I scroll through X and I love him more. And he's like your spouse, that when you love them, that even their weaknesses and mistakes actually become lovable. Man, I love it. And I love his team of pirates that he's got. And there's going to be tears and spills because they're taking a wrecking ball to the deep state, to the Washington, D.C. They're out to destroy it. And I love every bit of it. I love the AI going out and finding out where the dollars are gone. We've never seen anything like that. This is the biggest revolution in America since 1776, and it's going to flow right around the world. I never thought I'd be alive to see it. I am deeply, deeply thankful to be observing this fundamental shift that is going on and can't be stopped. Funnily enough, though, the thing that I loved the most was J.D. Vance coming out in support of big balls. So Elon Musk had a 19-year-old coder working for him, a genius. And some years earlier, he had put up on social media some inappropriate remark about Indians. The left found it. It was in the media. It ran across everywhere. And in the normal course of events, that would have ended Big Balls' life. The Big Balls is a joke because that's what the moniker he gave himself when he was being offensive. And in the normal course of events, a centre-right or conservative government would be backpedaling furiously, apologizing. Big balls would have been thrown under a bus, destroyed, and the whole mission of change would have been derailed. And J.D. Vance said, we're not sacrificing a young man's life or career for something silly that he did when he was younger. And he said, I hope my kids grow up and can make silly mistakes like I did and not have it wreck them. And that, to me, was the big cultural shift. The conservative right is no longer coward. It is standing proud. And it's exactly as Bruce Logan says, they're on the advance, they're not reacting.
Yeah.
The Democrats are making themselves look sillier and sillier because the issues that Trump is campaigning on and succeeding on have 80% support in America. And the Democrats are opposing them and are sinking in the polls.
Yeah, I found it fascinating that the Democrats were very upset that some teenagers were sort of having some influence and having some say, and yet they've been the ones promoting Greta Thunberg as the expert of climate alarmism from a very young age. So it sort of goes one way. So what do you think? I mean, I'm still concerned that we're just enjoying this because it's some policies that we like. If it was if Harris had won and she was going at this pace, we would be freaking out.
God forbid Harris won. We can thank God every day. Look, I guess we could, but remember that when Biden came in, and every other president, bar one, I think it was, they've all done executive orders, and they've all done done that with speed. We're just seeing what feels like a monumental task and huge issues just taken to with a sledgehammer, which is our dream come true because these are the issues we've battled for many, many years, because they're the big issues, and he's had to anchor it back, and so he's had to pull on so many issues. So I guess it looks like it's huge and it's fast because America was so far away from common sense and decency, and so he's just said no, this and this and this, and he's only got 4 years. I think Trump 2.0 is a better president for the years that he's had, and winning his third election. But I think he probably had to have those years in his first election, then had the middle years to see how bad it could get. And now he's saying, okay, now I know how this works, and I'm putting all the people in the places where they need to. It isn't actually all just about him. He's putting some really good people who know their stuff into the places. The highlight for me absolutely has to be reinstating XX women in sport and fairness in sport. And he not only had himself, this is a big one, loved it, but he had all the girls and the women there that were affected by those sports. He honoured the work of Riley Gaines.
Yeah.
And I think that's very when people say Trump is all about himself, he's actually not about himself, and Vance has been able to say things, and we've had other people voted in by not only just Trump signing it off. Remember, it is the Senate here too, voting and putting these things in place. But it's so huge because it was so wrong. And so we've had to just take a sledgehammer to it. So I've loved it. The only thing I would say, there's some flaws, there always will be, and I haven't always been fast and quick to come and sing his praises, and I've said that before. Maybe it's a concern with how much power is being given to Elon Musk. We've got to ask those questions because he's not an elected official. They would be my concerns. Rightly or wrongly, it's open for discussion.
Okay, Brendan, overall, but I'm also interested, for example, in the US aid issue. the funding, the USAID was closed down, but in fact, USAID was actually putting some funding into third world countries where it was actually needed, and actually some ministries were relying on that funding. So the concern is that they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, is the saying. Would you share those concerns?
I disagree. Having been someone who's worked in the space around ethical issues, particularly pro-life issues and sexuality, it has been known for several decades that USAID has been a sort of form of ideological colonization. They would go into countries, developing nations, and they'd say, we won't give you aid unless you introduce this very liberal sex education policy, or we won't give you this unless you change your abortion law. So it was a form of ideological colonization. It also was wasteful. Right back under Bill Clinton's tenure, Al Gore, who's vice president, actually published a paper over 30 years ago, and it was all about USAID and how wasteful it was. So there's been problems here, and it was never intended to be permanent. This was the thing. When JFK launched it, he was very clear this was not supposed to be a permanent thing. So I think that's a positive for me. I think also in response to your specific question, Bob, about the speed with which it's happening, I agree with what Sue has said. The rot is so great that it sort of feels, for some people, they freak out because, and this is one of the things I like, is we're actually seeing a conservative government using power to turn the ship. That has not been happening before. And so when you don't change the direction, the left just sit and wait and then carry on further ahead. Yep. And I think anyone sort of freaking out and going, oh, well, would we accept this if it was Kamala Harris? I'd say that just let go of the last residues of your old liberal order, which has collapsed. You either have to be virtuous or you're not going to be virtuous. You can't have a middle ground like we've tried to pretend that you can have. You actually have to have clarity in these areas. However, there are some issues for me. The IVF expansion, not only is there a big moral problem there, but also it's actually quite wasteful because more money will be pumped into this, but the majority of people who use it will not actually get pregnant. It's not a particularly effective technique. And also, Sue's right, there is a growing issue with Elon. And I suspect that in the next couple of weeks, Trump might pull him back in a little bit, because particularly yesterday when he came out with that email update and the press conference and the glasses, even good supporters I know of Trump from the States were sort of online saying they were a little bit nervous about this. So I expect Trump will actually will pull him back in a little bit, I suspect.
Yeah, I was thinking of doing one of those emails to the Family First staff and asking them to give me 4 bullet points of what they did yesterday. That would be a bit of fun. I did see that, for example, the FBI, the head of the FBI, the Hawaiian lady, which I can't remember her name, she said, I don't want you to answer this because I don't want people to know what you've done. I don't want that out in the public. So there has been some pushback from some of his staff.
And, all right, and to be fair, Bob, that's a legitimate concern too, because the FBI does deal in secure areas, and you shouldn't just be putting that out there. So, there are some issues.
Okay, comments are coming through thick and fast. I can see everybody's been waiting for us to start up again because they're all online. Justine says, New Zealand needs a Trump-type character. Our present government is too leftist. Jacob says, in my opinion, New Zealand is the #1 woke country in the world. Well, we're racing with Canada, I think. We don't have a conservative representative in Parliament. Well, there's a handful maybe. Aotearoa Maid says, Kia ora whānau, Trump's turn now to show the world what's been hidden and why they tried so hard to silence him. Trump 2025, let's go. Kirstine says, there does seem to be a spring in the step of all the panellists. It's to do with the holiday. I don't know if it's to do with the US election. I think it's just the fact we gave them a holiday. Manawa says Trump will be there for a long time. He just saved TikTok for the younger generation voters. So he's now God. Well, he's not really. Big power move play by him. And Raina, I hope I said your name right, Raina, well said panel, is an American. I totally agree with your comments on Trump and Vance. All right, let's keep moving. Hipkins versus Luxon. I mean, is Luxon going to make it to the next election? There's lots of noise around it. I think we always see that. Let's just quickly look at the latest polls. National and Labour are pretty even, according to the last One News poll. But if you look at the trend, the blue line up the top is National. So they're sort of hovering around that mark. Labour's had a little bit of a recovery. If you go down a bit further, you can actually see the Greens have dropped, which is not surprising given their policies. ACT a little bit of an increase, and despite all the coverage that the Maori Party have had, they have had a dip in the last one. And in the preferred Prime Minister, there we are, Christopher Luxon on 22, Chris Hipkins on 17. Now, the interesting thing about that is everybody looks at that and thinks, wow, Luxon is only on 22%. But when he became Prime Minister, he was actually only on 25%. So actually everybody's getting excited about that. But I am interested to know, I mean, there's all this noise around the fact that Luxon won't make it to the next election. And do you think that's correct? Rodney, as the ex-politician, is it all noise and bluster?
Yes, it's all noise and bluster, and we don't know. Having said that, he won't make it to the next election.
That's the prediction. Thank you, Rodney. Why not?
Well, he's zero in the charisma stakes. He hasn't connected with the New Zealand people in any way, shape or form. He hasn't done anything that's associated with his name that would lead you to go, yes, we've got to get this man back. So he's toast with the electorate, and it'll take a little time, but it'll show up. And it must be so tough to be in his caucus and going back to your electorate and to meetings and defending this. We had all those years of Labor running wild and doing their policies. We're now in government and we see nothing to fix it, nothing to reverse it. And if anything, he, Nicola Willis, Erica Stanford, they're just as woke and as disgusting as the last lot. Get rid of them.
Rodney, I'm interested just to ask you, you were in John Key's government. Where do you think John Key was different to Luxon? Why, John Key was quite popular during his term.
John Key had great charisma and he could connect to people. If you met him, you'd like him. He could go on TV and you would like him. He did give straight answers. He didn't talk in management speak. And in many ways, he was the same as Luxon, that you can't help but think that both of those men have become the Prime Ministers of New Zealand so they can add it to their CV. That they literally aren't there for us and they aren't there for the country. They're there like, I did the coast to coast, I climbed Mount Everest and I was Prime Minister. I find it appalling.
Okay, and you've predicted that Luxon won't make it to the next election very quickly. Hipkins?
Well, he probably will, because he looks positively manly against Chris Luxon.
He doesn't know what a woman is.
I know. Proves my point. He looks like a strong leader that's masculine.
Brendan, the problem for Luxon is that you've got a conservative leader in the form of Trump who's doing so much. And so, when I read that list, I actually was going to do up a meme of all the things that Luxon did in the first month of his tenure and that Trump did in the first month of his tenure. And then what did Luxon do? The only thing I could thought was that he committed himself that he would resign if the abortion law was changed. And, so the contrast in conservative leadership is quite glaring, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think Rodney summed it up perfectly. He is the ultimate representative of the elite bureaucratic managerial class. He is just a perfect example of that class. And there is a big charisma problem that he has. And also, I think what comes hand in hand with charisma is vision. And when I hear a prime minister saying, well, we need to grow the economy, I go, yeah, well, kind of that's obvious, but what do you mean by growth? And I hear ideas like, well, if we increase the speed limits, people will get there faster in their trucks and that will represent growth. And I think you don't know what you're talking about. And on top of that, it's clear that the cadre around him, I think Rodney's right. Like Nicola Willis, everyone was thinking maybe she's the leader in waiting. She's not. Chris Bishop, not. It's clear there's a competence problem there. And there are some good MPs a bit further down who are excluded from the Liberal wing of the party. So the Liberals have got control at the moment, and they're really doing national in a big way. As far as Chris Hipkins goes, I don't think he'll make it. I agree with Rodney. He looks sort of alongside the two. You'd probably sort of hold your nose and pick him. But when I look at things tonight, like the scandal with Andrew Bailey, who's just resigned, and you have Chris Hipkins coming out and saying, "Oh well, John Key's not even in charge." Sorry, not John Key. That's a Freudian slip, wasn't it? Luxon's not even in charge. His MPs are resigning, are quitting themselves out of the party, and this sort of thing would have never happened under Labor. And you think, no, that's exactly what did and was happening under Labor. And so he doesn't really have much of a leg to stand on. So like this should be a moment for them to capitalise on. And if they had a new and different leader who didn't have the old baggage, they would really be making hay right now, but they're not, because it's Luxon, and everyone remembers, for example, Kiri Allen, or the issue with that youth camp. It's he's still connected to all of that stuff. So until they get new, fresh leadership, I don't think all you're going to see is a sort of trading of that vote percentage that sort of swings between the new uniparty in New Zealand, which is Labor and National.
Okay, so should we just take what we know is good in the form of Luxon, because next in line would be Bishop, Stanford, and Minister of Finance, I've forgotten her name, and
Nicola Willis.
Nicola Willis. I mean, that would even be more liberal, socially liberal. So should we stick with perhaps the best we can get?
The one that we know, possibly. Look, like I've said before, I can be accused of bleeding blue. I've given my vote over many years, but in recent years, no. And we had a very clear indication of where Luxon would go in the lead up to the election. And I said it last year too, that he brings the CEO approach. What Luxon needs to do at the moment, rather than the squabbles about leadership, which is a bit mischievous from the media, to be honest, when they say that, bring Winston Peters into line and bring David Seymour into line. Well, they're a coalition. They're leaders of their own party. They don't have to answer to that per se. So that's mischievous from the media for a start. But here's a lesson for Luxon. Look at what's happening around the world. I don't know who is advising him at the moment, who's in his ear. That look around the world and look across the ditch to Dutton. He is gaining strength every day. Now, I don't agree with everything. Dutton needs a bit of polish up, and he needs to really assert himself when it comes to the women's policy, the protection of language and spaces, places, and the protection of erasure of women's language. And there has been some significant work by Peter Credlin in that, a great interview. He is looking prime ministerial every day. He's running circles around Albanese. On the anti-Semitism, he called, there's been a panel. What's Luxon doing in these issues? Like the others have said, get the economy. Well, hello, yeah, we know that. But yeah, where's your vision and where's your hard line on things? Where do you stand up for things? He's very overspeaks and apologetic. Yes, I guess we have to stick with that, but he needs to take some lessons and pull his socks up and stop this, we're looking into this talk. That's the kin to Labor saying we've set up a committee to deal with it. He's just got a lot to learn, and he's not really spinning the wheels for a lot of us at the moment. And because I live in a rural community, I have to give a nod to the farmers. They're absolutely brassed off with this whole net zero, continuing on with commitment to climate change and Simon Watt's rubbish. Farmers have done it tough under Labor, and they back National. Probably they swayed a bit to ACT because of Andrew, the ACT guy, ex-farmer. Andrew Hoggard. So he's knifing the people that should be his supporters. And I'll say it again, he's always gouged the Conservatives amongst us. So he does us no favours. I don't see anyone else. They're just the same, because they're the Liberals that have come together. The Nicola Willis and Bishop and all that will be same, if probably not worse. So but with Hipkins, he still hasn't got a vision for Labor. We still don't know who they stand for, what they stand for. And I'll still back that probably McAnulty and I'll still go to Willow Jean Prime as the young female Māori MP, and I'll take bets. I'm a betting girl, an Australian girl. I reckon that she'll have a place in leadership very soon.
Okay, Bruce, I don't want to be ageist, but you have seen a few Conservative Prime Ministers in your time. Why is it that Luxon's just not firing, do you think?
Well, he's got some very special problems, and contemporary problems that didn't exist a few years ago. Even John Key didn't have to confront them. There's a kind of atmosphere that's developed that we expect the state to be able to do everything. We look to the state to solve all our problems, and we're not quite sure whether we want a sugar daddy or an autocrat. And Luxon isn't quite sure whether he's a sugar daddy or an autocrat. And when you're hovering in between, it tends to stop the action going. And in talking about vision, in order to have vision, you've got to have knowledge and conviction. And I'm not sure that Luxon has convinced us that he is knowledgeable. He understands the underlying principles of government and what's really going on. And so he seems unable to confront the diversity cult, which of course Trump has done. He doesn't seem to understand the whole that cultural relativism is hamstringing us in our development. Yeah. He doesn't seem to see through that. And for example, on the Treaty of Waitangi, he should have, I think, said definitely yes or no to Seymour. Not, yeah, well, okay, we'll have the bill go to first reading and then we'll stop it there. It seemed to me to be a kind of shooting himself in the foot. It made him look more ineffectual, or at least created an atmosphere where he was going to look more ineffectual and not being definitive enough. It sort of made his government look weak. Nevertheless, he is confronting some very difficult problems. I mean, the inflation that we're confronting in New Zealand is not really, well, it is, much of it is homegrown, but a lot of it isn't.
Yeah.
And he's inherited some specific problems as well. I mean, not least is the allowing green ideology that the previous government did to control the way energy should be harnessed and used. The use of energy and what we're doing with energy is a very big deal around the Western world at the moment, and we need to understand what we're doing with it, because it's becoming very, very expensive, and it's something that he should take more account of. And Germany, by the way, should be a case study for us. Germany is a very good example of what happens when you don't control your energy and you don't understand how to keep the price down. So those problems he has inherited, but I would wish that he showed that he had some kind of vision based on knowledge and understanding of what is actually going on in the culture, and he doesn't seem to have that. And so that's just unfortunate.
All right, let's keep moving on. Let's get on to our next topic, and it's around protesting, because it's certainly been a controversial topic. Now, just before I get your opinion on this panel, I do just want to sort of set the scene. I think it's important because when I have talked to people about this, I have asked, have you watched the footage? And secondly, depending on what side they're coming from in the argument. And then the second question I ask is, do you know the background of the performer that people are concerned about? So let me just give you some quick background. So firstly, there was obviously this scene where the protesters turned up to an event. They were told that because of the way they had arrived and what they were dressed in, perhaps they weren't allowed. So then the scuffle broke out. And it all got pretty intimidating. It wasn't a public place, so it was pretty scary for people who were there. Some did break through it, as you can see there. And then as part of that, there was a little bit of hustle bustle. So this isn't a public place. So this is pretty scary for kids and families who may be there. So it's all go. Now, in fairness, I want to give the chance for you to hear exactly how Brian Tamaki from Destiny Church defended it. So this was the coverage and this was his interview.
But they're now investigating church members for their actions at a Te Atatu Rainbow event for children earlier on Saturday.
I said, go as peacefully as you can. We are peaceful protesters. Into the building, you've got a right to. They had tickets. You know, these people stepped out in front.
But today, Destiny Church's leader was unrepentant.
I've gone too far in protecting my children? I doubt it. What I'm saying here is that they haven't gone far enough. This government needs to have some balls and begin to deal with the problem that we have in the Rainbow Pride community.
Calling on the PM to do a Trump and declare 2 genders.
Chris, you know, you need to do a Elon Musk with me.
Oh, stay in your lane. You know, like I say, we don't come to your church to protest. Don't bother coming out of yours.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. Now, Luxon did respond, and this may just reinforce what you've all just said in the previous question.
Respect people's right to free speech. We respect people's right to peaceful protests. They went too far, and you know, this is a country that values diversity and is well known for doing so. And you know, New Zealand is a much better place because of the diversity that's in it.
Is it just a matter for the police, Prime Minister, something like that? Do you feel at PM that you need to send a message to the members of the new church?
I don't know how I can be any clearer than my message I've just said just now.
Are you going to the big gay out later today?
I'm not. I have been in the past though, and I really enjoy it. And I'm a big fan of what the Burnett Foundation have been doing around sexual health and HIV. They do incredible work.
Okay, let me just remind you about the Burnett Foundation. This is one of the posters that we managed to get taken down outside dairies. That's the type of grubby, hedonistic stuff that they promote. And just recently they put this one out that Health New Zealand retweeted. There was a big upset. I apologise for the offensiveness of that. But apparently the Prime Minister says that Burnett Foundation are doing a great job. Now, the other side of this debate, which I don't think people understand who may be upset with the protest, is who is the drag queen and what is their persona? Well, once again, slightly offensive images, but this is the persona of the drag queen that wants to read stories to little kids. This is their dancing. This is their part of their costume. They say that they create smutty, rough around the edges, politically charged late night theatre, but they still want to read books to little kids. They've even got a trans pride show. And there is this footage here where he actually mocks the church. So this is part of his, well, her performance. Her trans to a man, but now as a drag queen woman. So go figure that out. Yeah. So look, I wanted to show both those sides because there's the argument that the protest was inappropriate, but there's also the argument that why are we allowing that type of persona in front of kids? So, and the question is, can sometimes protests do more harm than good? Is there a time and a place? And maybe this wasn't the time and the place. Brendan, let me lob the grenade into your room. What do you think?
Well, maybe it's just the Irishman in me, but I'm not particularly shocked. And I actually think there is a time to say, look, to borrow a phrase, enough is enough, quite frankly. And it's just disappointing. Chris Luxon there saying, oh, it makes us stronger. No, it doesn't make us stronger to have our children being propagandized in this repugnant, obscene kind of way. And not to mention that it's just gauche, blimmin' cheap, cringy theatre anyway. It's not even anything of any great artistic merit. And so from my perspective, I think there is a growing frustration in the community. And like it or not, Brian Tamaki does represent a strong Māori and also Pacifica voice. And these people are part of our community. They actually do their best to try and raise their children with a sense of virtue and modesty, and it is being ridden roughshod right over the top of. The other thing that I'm really interested in is, isn't this a public venue? And if what Brian has said here is correct, that they had tickets, then you can't actually just stop someone and say, well, you're not allowed in here. You can't have it both ways. It's either a closed event and you're going to actually properly, run the thing and it's closed and it's age restricted and all the rest of it, or it's an open public thing. And they're trying to have a buck each way. And I think realistically, for me, my patience as a parent is kind of wearing thin with this obscenity, quite frankly. And so, I'm not, and maybe it's the Irishman in me, but I didn't see, I saw some people who did allow their passions to get a little bit ahead of them, and that wasn't good towards the end. But at the end of the day, it's sooner or later the dam has got to break.
We've always been concerned on the March for Life in Wellington that the pro-abortion groups are often very hostile. They are quite intimidating. Have we lost the moral ground by acting similar to them, or is it correct because we need to protect the kids?
Well, I'm not sure there's a necessarily a clear comparison here in the March for Life and what's going on here. I think the March for Life is, in a sense, a battle of ideas. There is a particular evil that is quite harmful to children and has very serious downstream consequences, as we know now, in the fruit that it's given rise to, and like the permanent scarification of young people. And it's just not good enough for Luxon to sit there and to sort of try and middle ground this. There isn't. There's got to be a clear position on this. And so I think there's a bit of a distinction there. And also I'd have to say, I think I look at what happened there with the Destiny Church. And although, look, I absolutely agree that you don't do immoral and unjust things, and I think you must work hard to restrain your passions, I think the media have absolutely turned this into, when I heard the first reports, I thought, oh my gosh, what have they done? And I looked at the actual footage and I'm like, okay, this is something that's sort of got a scuffle that's sort of erupted and got a little bit out of control, but it wasn't this riotous act of violence and storming the sort of the Palisades that I was led to believe it was initially. So I think there's a little bit of that going on as well.
Okay, Sue, what do you think?
Well, I've been in protests and various things, and I've gone to March for Life, and yes, the anti-protest was very vocal and had some very vulgar signs and what have you. As a protester, as someone who's advocated on issues, I wouldn't have gone into the library. I saw some of those great signs, say no to the pride propaganda, and they had really clever signage. They probably could have added some of those grotesque images of the drag queen or king or whatever they like to call themselves, which would have been a visual and get your message across very quickly out on the streets. Not silent, but a peaceful protest out the front. When they entered the building, when you look at that footage, it got very chaotic and you didn't know who was who. There were a couple of people with pride t-shirts on, but you didn't know who was pushing who. And it got very messy and very out of control. And yeah, it fed the media narrative against us. On the other hand, showing up at the Pride Parade, it's my understanding that haka was actually given pre-permission and police support. They went on, did their haka, the police stopped the parade moving forward, and then they left. And they got their message across. People weren't unhappy. So I guess I think that there's always a way to protest, and when it gets out of control, I think you start to blur the edges, and your footage is no longer relevant because you don't know. I didn't know who was Destiny and who was the librarians. Really, it got a bit messy. So I think that they probably would have been more effective had they lined the street out the front and stayed out the front with their banners and signs. I do, I think I'd get frustrated. Like, I mean, I'm a mother, and yeah, I think that this is absolutely horrendous to have for children. And there'll be a way of, we've got to push back. And I think we're starting to gain that ground again. But the messiness of inside the library just muddied that water a bit. And I think we probably lost a bit of ground.
Okay, Rodney?
100% support for Brian Tamaki. Picture this. For a start, I regard these drag queen shows as pornography. If there was pornography being shown in a public library to little kids and their parents were willingly taking their kids along, it would be stopped immediately because you just call the police and they'd put a stop to it and arrest and charge people. But what is going on in these shows, the people that are putting them on are pornographers. They're not, you don't get female strippers going off to the library to read to little kids. So what is going on here is a deep sexual deviancy. These trans people reading to these little kids are achieving a sexual gratification from it. In a normal functioning society, you would ring the police, you'd ring your local council, and they'd put a stop to it, no matter what the parents of those little kids want, even if it was in their own home. We've got the bizarre situation where the police are defending it. We've got the bizarre situation where the council are paying for it. We've got the shocking situation where the Prime Minister is extolling it. Next time Brian Tamaki wants to storm a library and protect those little kids, I wouldn't mind being with him. Because who's going to stand up for those little kids in that room, if not us? Because we can no longer rely on the authorities. That's the issue here. We're not actually talking about a protest. The protest was the haka in the street. These kids being exposed for someone else's sexual gratification, that's a crime. We need to stop it.
Okay, Bruce?
Look, I must say I do agree with Rodney. What he said, I think, is absolutely right. I'd like to put it in another different context. The first thing that needs to be said about what Destiny is doing is that it has a right, and not only does it have a right to protest, it has a responsibility to protest. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a minute. Now, the purpose might have been compromised. I'm not going to worry too much about that because plenty has been said about that. But I'd like to put it in some kind of historical context just to show that we do have a long history, if we'd like to consider about it. In 1644, a very wise man called Samuel Rutherford wrote one of the most important and enduring books on law ever written, Lex Rex, or The Law and the Prince. And Lex Rex means, in Latin, the law is king. Now, among a lot of other things, he laid down the framework for protest. He said, why is protest legitimate? And he said, protests are lawful if one obeys a higher law when protesting. The protests take place because of that higher law, and that's what I mean by responsibility to protest. We tend to think of protesting as some kind of negative thing we do, but it is actually a positive thing, or it can be a positive thing, and should be a positive thing. Destiny and protesting the drag queens were drawing attention, I think, to a much wider issue. They were pointing out what we learn uniquely from Genesis. We have been created male and female in God's image, and that gives us our dignity, and it is the only thing that gives us our dignity. Drag queens teaching their ideology to children clearly deny that. Not only did the protesters have this right to protest, they had the responsibility to do so, which, by the way, the Christian church has also. Certainly the mainstream media might think they were doing wrong, but that's what they do. That's why they do it. But that's a minor issue compared with the real one that would tell us, and what's going on here, would tell us the kind of creatures that we really are as human beings, created by God and responsible to him for self-creating creatures responsible to no one but ourselves. We're either created by God or we're self-created creatures responsible to no one but ourselves. And that is the ideology that drag queenism is teaching us. What you really saw in the protest was a conflict between two religions. Christianity on the one hand, with its belief in God-given dignity and responsibility that goes with that understanding of dignity. And on the other hand, a developing civil religion supported by all those people that Rodney was talking about that preach the goodness of unrestrained human desire. And that is the nature of the battle we find ourselves in.
Bruce, Rodney, what do you say to the argument that at the end of the day, whether we agree with it or not, and we obviously, none of us do, parents have made a decision to take their children to the performance. And in the same way that we hated it when the government was telling us how we should raise our children and that they were criminalising parents who were raising their kids in a good way, in the same way, at the end of the day, the parents make the decision. We should therefore somehow persuade the parents.
Quite, and it's a tough one in the sense. If there was a hardcore pornographic display going on in that library, none of us would have any question.
No.
Even the police would get it. And Chris Luxon might think about it for a minute or two and come to the right conclusion. The issue that we're having is this hardcore pornography? And I say it is. You only have to see the persona of this drag king, drag queen, whatever, to see what they're bringing to the show.
Yeah.
Even if they don't do, quote, the full Monty.
Yeah.
Because they are turning up for sexual gratification and to reshape these toddlers' minds about what it is to be a man and a woman. And to me, it's pornography. At that point, the parents are child abusers. Now, that's a line, right? That's a line that we could quibble about. And I accept that. But I've come to the conclusion that that line's been crossed. And we have a responsibility to those children to stop it. And the parents can't willingly expose their children to it.
Mm.
It's tough because we'd like to think that that line wasn't being crossed in the library.
Mm.
I think
Okay.
it was.
Brendan, I mean, it does raise, I mean, I know you go around talking a lot about ethics, teaching on ethics. It raises the ethical dilemma of when can a protest involve physical action of actually forcing your way into a place that you've been told you can't go into?
Well, and this actually, what you're highlighting here, Bob, is one of the bigger problems that actually plagues our current society, and it's the reason why it's collapsed, actually, and is in a state of freefall, is because we tried to build a society where everyone just made up their own version of moral truth. And we said, you just live and let live. And it turns out you can't have a society that way, and this is the fruit of that kind of society. And so from an authentically conservative position, we would say, in actual fact, evil doesn't have any rights, and it can't claim rights in the public square. This is really what Rodney, I think, is alluding to, that you can't claim a right for an evil deed. Goodness can claim a right. And so what we need to get clearer on is what is good and what is true, what is evil and what is false, and then also, therefore, what should command our public square? That which is good and that which is true. And so I think the reality is that in the liberal worldview, it's like, well, everyone just does whatever they want. But from an authentically conservative position, we would say, no, there is actually such a thing as truth, and we need to discover what that is if we want to have a full and flourishing society. And we need to also recognize, therefore, there are natural law corresponding evils. And that, again, this is what Rodney is pointing to. And we need to actually do our best to restrict such harms, because otherwise the consequences are extremely disastrous. And so, yeah, I think there's a much bigger conversation that maybe we're just starting to realize now, heck, it's actually not really just about live and let live or let's all be liberals. You've actually got to have a society formed around a bigger idea.
Bruce, is there, I mean, the concern is that by taking the actions that they did, they've turned the drag queens now into victims, and those calling out this behaviour look like the bad guys, and that's the perception. Sure, that's media driven, that's politically driven because the politicians haven't got backbone on this issue and haven't dealt with it. But do we need to be thinking about that aspect?
I'm sure we do, but nevertheless, getting past that oppressed syndrome or illness or pathology or whatever you want to call it is very hard, because the media is onto it, and they see them. The drag queen lobby sees itself as oppressed, no doubt, and certainly makes much out of that. I don't think there were. I don't think there was too much pressure. I think we can be too sensitive to the kind of criticism that is not balanced, and I don't think it was. I would like to see a bit more kickback, a bit more confidence in the people who are standing up for what they believe to be true. And we do have to stand up for what's true. As Brendan said, there is a truth to protect. There is a truth to struggle towards. And I like what Brendan said about evil has no rights. And that is something that's very, very significant. We should let that sink in, I think, into our little psyches.
All right. Sue, did you have any final comment to make?
No, I do agree. I agree with you all, but I just think I wouldn't have gone into the building like that, but that's probably me being female. No doubt my husband would have been in there.
I think that's true.
But you do raise an interesting perspective in that the protest was quite intimidating for mothers and children that were there. And I think there was legitimate concern about that.
If it was on the other side, if I was in there having a family first gathering and I had radicals, or even remember the Posey Parker protest, I would feel very unsafe. And I think we can't dismiss that we've lost the art of being able to protest and debate and to navigate this with a clear head. It's pretty feisty out there. And I had planned to go to the Posey Parker rally, and I was in Auckland, then I moved to going to Wellington. And in the end, I said to my daughter, no, I don't think it's going to be safe enough. We're going to have to be really careful here. Comparing protests of bygone years to now, they get pretty feisty. And I just think it's not that we can't not buy into it. I just think it got muddy as to who was pushing and shoving. And yeah, I guess, like I said, it probably comes from me as a woman who I wouldn't put, I'd stand it there with my placard and do, they were great messages, but it was all lost.
I mean, Brendan, that's a very good point. Sorry to labour this issue, but I am fascinated by it. Can we condemn the trans activists who shut down the Posey Parker rally and yet not condemn anti-drag queen activists who want to shut down library reading and a drag queen library reading?
Yeah, I kind of actually think you can make a distinction because they're not just neutral acts. They actually have
but isn't that based on your view?
Yeah, exactly. And my view, I believe, is actually good, true, and beautiful, and not just.
I think it is too.
It's not just my own personal opinion. That's the problem with liberalism. It wants to pretend there is no truth here. Yeah. And so I've got no problem with saying, like Sue's right, and I think it's good to have this discourse too, by the way, Sue, because it is an important thing to throw around. If we want to see an end to the intimidation and to the immoral behaviours against children, someone's just got to say, hey, this is not good enough and it's got to stop. And there's sort of, the reality is we got to these pressure cooker moments because we're not living and functioning as a society as we should in this regard. And so, look, I'm not unsympathetic to that, Bob, and I am very well aware of. But one thing I would say, though, is that I'm not sure. I think people are perhaps overcooking how much of a negative outcome this is, in the sense that I think maybe 10 years ago this would have been a disastrous PR thing. But I think a lot of people in society are just quietly, they might not be saying anything, but they are so frustrated by this and so concerned by this behaviour that I don't know if the media attempt to paint, one side as these victims and this was sort of an out of control violent rampage. I think it was aggressive, but I wouldn't say that this was violent.
There's a simple answer to you, Bob.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference. The Posey Parker was a battle of ideas. And one group was trying to shut down the other's opportunity to express their ideas. I'd never advocate for that.
I mean, Bruce...
With the library reading, there was an adult getting sexual gratification of children. It wasn't a battle of ideas.
Bruce, I just want to ask you, does it come down to ideology? Because those on the other side who think that drag queens reading in libraries is quite innocent and quite fun and quite entertaining for children are also highly offended by someone like Posey Parker turning up who thinks that a man cannot become a woman. So isn't that a battle of the ideas as well? I'm being devil's advocate here.
No, it isn't a battle of ideas as well. As Brendan has repeated, he said, there is truth in the world. And either there is truth or there isn't truth.
Yep.
And that's not a battle of ideas, of where you've got two ideologies competing with one another, two ideologies that are based on some kind of rational understanding. You've got one truth, which is based on something that's been revealed to us and which sustains Western civilization. And that is the Genesis story that we have been created in God's image, male and female. And as that's what gives us our dignity. And that's what gives human beings dignity. And it is absolutely central to the whole of Western civilization. And that is what determines who we are. And the ideology that is underpinning the drag queens is the opposite of that. It's saying that God doesn't give us dignity. I make my own dignity. And that is, as Brendan has said, a recipe for disaster. And that's what's happening to us.
All right. We're just about over time. I just want to do one more quick topic, and that is lunches in schools very quickly, because I just want to know, is there such a thing as a free lunch? Basically, the media have spent the whole time attacking the free lunches. Let me just show you. So this is just the New Zealand Herald's coverage. Burnt school lunches, pies and pitapit to be served instead. Lunches arrived late. In Rotorua, they were furious because it was bland meals. They had to do a sausage sizzle one time. The $3 lunch, they had a restaurateur come in and give a critic's verdict, even though you don't choose the meal from a menu. Maybe they didn't tell the restaurateur. Parents are upset about the unidentified. This is just the New Zealand Herald coverage this year. The meals weren't halal. Hundreds of school lunches going uneaten. It's pretty bad. I hate it. And this is just today, what the Ministry of Education is being told about school lunches. Rodney, you used to be in politics and you used to authorise spending and you used to cut spending. What's going on here? I mean, the media, I thought the media would love school and lunches in schools because it's a kind of socialist idea, and yet they've been attacking this one like nobody's business. It's just because it's David Seymour's baby, is it?
Yes, and it's a total failure of the National Act and New Zealand First Government, because it's Economics 101. It's a bit of a joke, isn't it? What would happen if a government department took over the running of McDonald's and handed out McDonald's for free? Would McDonald's would the burger and the chips get better? And you know exactly it would be rubbish. None of us around this panel want to eat a meal prepared under government supervision and by government. I mean, it's an absurdity. So they should quit it. But it's also a deeper thing. It's a parental responsibility to feed your children. And we've removed that. No one said in any of those things, oh, well, where was mum and dad in preparing that halal meal for little Abdab? Where were they? Kid didn't like sausage. Well, where was mum and dad preparing something different? I love making my kids' lunches for school because it's a connection for them through the day. I can remember the beautiful lunches that my mother made. It was a connection for me at school to think of her love and her care for me. We do know that there are kids that are coming to school hungry, but we can provide for them in the community. The school just has to open up to us, and we would be down there with lunches lovingly made for those kids. Any one of us would just need to be asked. So this is a socialist enterprise that national-led government has taken over to try and run better at a lower cost without seeing wrecking their philosophy on the rocks of socialism.
Okay, Brendan, you got any sympathy for lunches in schools?
Yeah, I'd tend to agree with Rodney, actually. And I think, and I say this as someone who grew up in a very, very poor welfare class family. So I know what it is to struggle and not be certain about where the next meal was coming from. But somehow my parents still managed to actually produce a lunch every day for us. It wasn't glamorous, but it actually hit the mark. One thing I had to realize as I got older and left home was even though the state was trying to help me, by not empowering my own subsidiarity and giving me what I needed to become someone who could actually operate under my own steam, I did experience and realize I had a bit of entitlement about what I thought I was entitled to from the state, and that wasn't healthy. I had to actually deal with that as an adult because we'd sort of got into that sort of trap a little bit. But I think the reality is, if you want to solve this problem, what are we doing to actually empower families? Don't insert the state, like Rodney said, into the family. Let's empower families and address, if you're not running your economy properly and there is a serious issue with a lack of virtue in your economy and that's creating a level of poverty, deal with it and address it in such a way where the families are empowered to keep being families and doing what they should and rightly should be empowered to do by the state, not inserting the state in as some weird sort of chain smoking, school cook to serve up whatever's on the plate.
Now, I actually had a close relative that was in hospital over January, and I won't name the hospital, but I can tell you what, the meals that were served up in hospital were nowhere near as nice as some of the ones I've seen being served in schools. So I thought maybe we send the kids to hospital, give them a couple of nights in hospital for hospital food, and then they'd really appreciate it. Bruce, have we lost our way on this issue?
Oh, yes, we certainly have. To have even contemplated the idea that the state should supply food to families or to in schools, it was an absurd idea. You supply it at a local level. If there's a problem, you try to attend it at a local level. And Rodney's idea of people going down and supplying it at a charitable level is workable, very workable. And if somehow or other it gets out of some kind of problem and out of control in some particular areas, there may be a government subsidy might help with those people who are doing it at a local level. But to have government control of it is just, well, incredibly absurd. I don't know how we even got into it.
Okay. And Sue, finally? You got a final word.
The last word. That doesn't happen very often in our house.
It always happens in my house. No, I get the final word. Yes, dear. Go on.
The targeted need. We can't just say for the sake of children, we don't want a few to be shamed. Well, so everyone gets a lunch. Look, that's just an impossible task and wasteful from government level. So target the need, use our churches and communities. That's how best to deal with it. But we're also denying our children that great pleasure of the gathering at lunchtime. I don't know, it was a girl thing, sit in our circle and swap lunches and, what have you got? So someone always had a better lunch and we'd swap lunches. So we're denying our children that experience of the great lunch swaps and again, provision of, and the other thing is also, as they get older, we're talking about colleges with these meals. My children from quite a young age, call me hard, whatever you like, but from a young age, because I was going out to work, both of us, my husband and I going out to work, it was a busy household, they were tasked with making their own lunches at a certain age. And we had stuff in the house and say, okay, get yourself organised. I don't want to know at 7:30 in the morning that you need something. You think about it the night before. So we're teaching them independence. We're teaching them to be organised, show up with your lunch ready for the day. So we're taking away some sort of organisational training in our kids. If we say, show up to school and, they'll throw in a lunch. We had great skills, and they still make the lunches. So, yeah.
Okay. Look, just before we go, done very well, panel. Great job. Tomorrow morning, Simon O'Connor is here with Solid Ground, and he's actually still in Europe. He'll tell you where he is, I think, tomorrow morning when he's on. It'll be nighttime where he is. That's just a little hint. And very exciting because he's away this Thursday on Political Playback. I've got a guest panelist. Woo! It's Chris Luxon? No, it's Rodney Hyde. Rodney Hyde is going to be joining me.
Actually, I think that's defamatory.
It is defamatory.
Now that's doubly defamatory.
So this Thursday at 5:00, I'll have Rodney Hyde on the political panel. Anyway,
both Brendan and Bob are getting a letter from my lawyer.
I'll send you a cut, Rodney. The other thing is, I noticed somebody asked us, Clara said, are you live on X too? Yes, we are on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. We're on X. We're even on TikTok live, broadcasting live. So we are everywhere.
Hello, China.
Very exciting to be back for the first time for the year, and we will return next Monday night at 8:00. Thank you, panel. Did a great job. And thank you for watching. See you next week.